The gas station never truly slept. Even in the deepest hours of night, there was always some restless engine pulling in, headlights cutting across the wet pavement, the hiss of tires splashing through puddles that never had a chance to dry. The air smelled of gasoline, fried food drifting from the diner across the road, and something metallic. A faint, bitter tang of rain pooling in rusted drains. And in the middle of it all, unmoving, sat the German shepherd. At first glance, he seemed like he might belong to someone. A car parked nearby, a leash just out of sight. But when the station clerk closed up his shift and came back hours later, the dog hadn't budged. He sat squarely on a patch of cracked concrete beneath the buzzing fluorescent light, his body slick from the rain that refused to let up, his chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. His fur clung to him like a soaked rag, darkened with water until the tan and black merged into shadows. His ribs pressed sharp against his sides, every inhale revealing the thin line between endurance and collapse. Yet it wasn't his body that haunted those who looked at him. It was his eyes, golden, deep, burning with a kind of patience too heavy for an animal to carry. He wasn't scanning the lot, wasn't curious about the strangers who slowed their steps to watch him. His gaze never wavered from the road, the stretch of highway that curved out into the darkness, the path where a car had once vanished, taking with it the only thing he had ever trusted. Every now and then a driver would kneel, holding out a paper bag of fast food or the corner of a sandwich. The dog's head would turn, but his body remained rigid, his paws rooted in waterlogged concrete. He wouldn't touch the food. His hunger was raw, but it wasn't stronger than his loyalty. His silence, his refusal, spoke louder than any bark. "I can't leave." "They're coming back." The storm came suddenly. Thick drops, cold as melted glass, hammered the pavement. Within minutes, the lot became a field of reflections, neon reds and greens swimming in puddles, headlights scattering into fragments. Thunder rolled above, each crack sharp enough to rattle the windows of the convenience store. The shepherd flinched at the sound, his ears pressing back, his entire body quivering as lightning slashed the sky. But even then he didn't run. He hunched lower to the ground, water dripping from his muzzle, shivering, yet unmoving. His vigil was stronger than his fear. The station attendant, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, stepped outside with a broom still in his hand. "Hey, boy," he murmured, his voice softened by pity. He scattered some leftover fries onto the pavement, but the shepherd only blinked, his gaze never breaking from the horizon. The man shook his head, muttering to himself as he retreated inside. "Somebody did this to you, didn't they?" Cars kept coming. A woman in a minivan slowed, her children pressing their noses to the glass. "Look, Mommy, a dog!" But the mother, cautious, drove on. A trucker parked his rig and tossed half a sandwich his way. The bread landed with a splash, dissolving into soggy pieces the shepherd ignored. Hours passed like this. Human hands reaching, human voices coaxing, but nothing strong enough to sever the invisible tether between him and the memory of the car that had abandoned him. The night deepened. The rain eased into a mist that clung like a second skin, wrapping the world in damp silence. The station lights buzzed, casting the shepherd in a halo of artificial glow, his shadow stretching long and lonely across the cracked concrete. He looked less like a living animal now and more like a statue carved from grief, a monument to faith misplaced. Then headlights cut across the lot, brighter than the rest. A sedan pulled up slowly, its wipers working against the sheets of water still drizzling down. Behind the glass, a woman's eyes lingered on the shepherd. She should have kept driving, and people always did, but something snagged her. The sight of him, soaked and trembling, locked in a battle between hope and despair, clutched at her chest like a fist. She watched as he lifted his head just slightly at the sound of her engine, ears pricking. His gaze snapped toward her car, not at her, but past her, through her, scanning, searching, desperate. And when she parked and stepped out, umbrella in hand, his body stiffened, hope flaring and dying in the same breath. She wasn't who he was waiting for. The woman crouched low, her boots sinking into the puddles, the umbrella forgotten. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, voice barely carrying over the hum of rain. She held out her hand, palm open. The shepherd's ears twitched, but his body didn't move. His chest rose, fell, rose again, each breath shallow. His eyes flickered, to her hand, to the road, back to the darkness. For a moment she thought he might come closer. His paw shifted an inch, scraping the concrete. But then, headlights swept across the lot again. Another car pulling in. and the shepherd jerked back, his body low, heart pounding visibly beneath his wet coat. His eyes widened, filled with something raw, a recognition, a question, a wound reopening. The woman froze, her own breath caught in her throat. She could feel the weight of his sorrow pressing into her, a silent story written in every drop of rain sliding off his trembling body. And in that instant she knew. This wasn't a stray. This wasn't a dog without a past. This was a heartbroken sentinel, waiting for someone who would never return. The car beside her filled with fuel, the driver tapping the pump handle impatiently. The gas station hummed with life, indifferent, mechanical. Yet she stayed crouched in the rain, her hand extended, whispering words the shepherd did not trust. Words he may never trust. The rain thickened again, drumming against the metal roof of the awning. The shepherd closed his eyes briefly as if shutting out the world, and when he opened them again, he turned back to the road. The woman lowered her hand, her chest tightening, knowing this wasn't over. Not tonight. Behind her, the station lights flickered, buzzing in their endless cycle. Ahead of her, the shepherd stared into darkness that gave nothing back. And somewhere between those two worlds, the woman watching, the dog waiting, the story began. Would he survive another night out here? Would he ever let her in? Or would the road claim him first? The storm had not let up by morning. The gas station awning leaked in places, sending thin waterfalls dripping onto the blacktop below. The shepherd was still there, curled in the same patch of concrete, though his body sagged now, his chest rising with heavier effort. The rain had plastered his fur down so tightly it was hard to tell where his frame ended and the pavement began. He was dissolving into the place, like the concrete had claimed him. The woman couldn't shake his image. She had driven home the night before, turned on the kettle, tried to push the thought of him from her mind. But when she sat by her window with her tea, she saw only his eyes, that moment of almost recognition, that fragile hope collapsing into despair. She couldn't sleep. She told herself he was just a dog, that surely someone else would stop, that it wasn't her burden. But when dawn came and the sky cracked with another roll of thunder, she was back behind the wheel, heading toward the station with blankets and a paper bag of food on the passenger seat. When she pulled in, her heart sank. He was still there, exactly as she had left him, only thinner, somehow, smaller. The puddles around him reflected the neon and the clouds, rippling with every drop of rain. She cut the engine and stepped out without an umbrella this time. The water soaked her hair instantly, ran cold along her neck, but she didn't care. She crouched low again, closer this time, speaking softly over the sound of rain. "Sweet boy, you don't have to stay here?" The shepherd's ears twitched, but his gaze was fixed on the road. His body was rigid, paws pressed flat against the wet concrete. She reached into the bag, pulled out a strip of chicken, and laid it gently on the ground between them. The scent cut through the air, warm and savory. His nose twitched, betraying him. But still he didn't move. Minutes stretched into hours. She stayed crouched, her knees aching, water running down her arms as she whispered every gentle word she could think of. People came and went, filling their tanks, buying coffee, glancing at the odd scene of a soaked woman pleading with a soaked dog. Most shook their heads, pity softening their faces before they moved on. The shepherd's hunger gnawed at him. His body trembled, his ribs straining against his skin. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he shifted his paw forward, dragging it an inch across the ground. His nose lifted toward the chicken. His muscles tensed, caught between instinct and heartbreak. She held her breath, but just then a car pulled into the lot. Its headlights swept across them, bright and sudden, scattering the fragile trust that had been forming. The shepherd jolted upright, hackles raised, a growl tearing from his throat. His eyes widened, wild, darting toward the car with desperate intensity. And for a heartbeat, she saw it. The hope that this was the one, that this was the car returning for him. But the door opened, and only a stranger stepped out. The shepherd's growl cracked into a whimper. He backed away, paws slipping on the wet concrete, tail tucked so tightly it nearly touched his belly. The chicken lay untouched. The woman's chest tightened as she whispered, "Oh, sweetheart." "No one's coming," her voice broke on the words. The shepherd blinked, his breath coming fast, his body shivering. He wanted to believe her, she could see it. But belief meant letting go of the only thing he had left. The night stretched long. She sat on the wet ground until her jeans were soaked through, her fingers numb from the cold. She left blankets near him, though he didn't dare touch them. She laid out food, which he sniffed but refused, and all the while she spoke. About nothing, about everything. About how he deserved warmth, how she had space in her car, how she wouldn't leave him. Her voice trembled with exhaustion, but she kept talking, because silence felt too dangerous, too much like giving up. Somewhere past midnight, the gas station lights flickered. The world was empty except for the hum of rain and her voice. The shepherd lay down again, curling tighter, his gaze still drifting to the road. His eyelids drooped, heavy with exhaustion, but he fought sleep as though it were a betrayal. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the thud of her own heart. How long has he been here? How many nights like this? She didn't know, and the thought clawed at her. Her phone buzzed with a message from a friend. Come home. You can't save them all. She stared at the words, anger and sorrow twisting together. Maybe she couldn't save them all, but this one, this broken, loyal soul who refused to leave the place he'd been discarded, she couldn't turn away from him. Not now, not after seeing the way his eyes still searched the road. So she stayed, through the rain, through the dark, through the creeping cold that made her bones ache. She stayed because leaving felt like joining the ranks of those who had already abandoned him, and as the first light of dawn touched the edges of the horizon, painting the wet pavement in shades of pale gold, the shepherd shifted again. His body wobbled as he tried to stand, weak legs trembling. He stepped toward the food, nose dipping low. For a moment it seemed he might finally break the spell of his vigil. But then, a truck roared down the highway, engine growling, and his head snapped back toward the road, eyes blazing with hope that died in the same instant. He froze, trembling, then backed away again. The woman closed her eyes, rain running down her face like tears. She whispered a promise into the morning air. I'll come back tomorrow. I'm not leaving you here. And somewhere behind his guarded eyes, she thought, maybe, he heard her. The third morning came heavy with gray clouds, the kind that pressed low against the earth and made the world feel smaller, suffocating. The woman parked her car in the same spot. Her stomach knotted tighter than the night before. She hadn't slept more than an hour. His eyes, that trembling body, the way he looked at every car with desperate hope and crushing disappointment. It replayed endlessly behind her eyelids. She had called a local rescue the night before, her voice unsteady, describing the shepherd's condition, her fear that he wouldn't survive another day. And now, as she stepped out with blankets and food in her arms, she wasn't alone. A man in his 40s followed her, his jacket patched with the logo of a rescue organization. He carried a catchpole and a worn canvas bag. His eyes swept the lot, lingering on the shepherd curled in his familiar place, as though carved there by grief. Jesus, the rescuer whispered under his breath. He's emaciated. The shepherd lifted his head slowly, ears pricking, body stiffening. His ribs stood out like scaffolding beneath the wet fur, his frame shaking as though every breath carried a weight too heavy. Yet his gaze, sharp and unyielding, still clung to the road. The woman knelt, her hands shaking as she unwrapped chicken and placed it gently on the pavement. Hey, sweetheart, I'm back. I told you I'd come back. The shepherd's nose twitched, but he stayed rooted, body taut like a bowstring. The rescuer crouched a few feet behind her, speaking low. If he doesn't eat soon, his organs will start shutting down. Malnutrition like this? He's running on fumes. The words struck like stones against her ribs. She glanced at the shepherd, who blinked at her with those hollow golden eyes. He was so close to surrender she could feel it. Yet surrender, for him, meant betrayal. Letting go of the one who had left him here. The rain had lessened, replaced by a thin mist clinging to the air. Cars passed in and out, engines growling, tires hissing. Each set of headlights sent the shepherd's head jerking up, eyes flaring with fragile hope, only to dim again when unfamiliar doors opened and closed. He rose suddenly, his legs wobbling beneath him, as though he meant to walk straight into the road. The woman's heart slammed against her chest. No, no, baby, stay here. Her voice cracked, panic spilling into the air. The shepherd staggered 2 steps forward, his paws slipping on the wet pavement. Then his body buckled. He collapsed hard onto his side, chest heaving in sharp, ragged gasps. His legs twitched as though caught between flight and collapse, and for one frozen moment the woman thought he was gone. She dropped everything, her knees slamming into the pavement as she scrambled to his side. Her hands hovered helplessly over his trembling frame. No, no, please, don't you dare leave me now. The rescuer was suddenly beside her, kneeling, his voice calm but urgent. "He's crashing. We've got to get him in the car now." The shepherd's eyes fluttered open, cloudy but still burning with the same stubbornness that had kept him alive this long. His gaze flickered between them, confusion etched in every shallow breath. The woman pressed her hand gently to his shoulder, whispering through tears, "I'm not leaving you, I promise. Please, just let me help you." The rescuer slipped the loop of the catchpole carefully around his neck, not pulling tight, just enough to guide. The shepherd's body jerked weakly, but he no longer had the strength to resist. His paws scraped against the pavement as they lifted him, his weight lighter than it should have been, like carrying a ghost wrapped in fur. The woman cradled his head in her lap as they maneuvered him toward her car. His breath rattled against her jeans, warm but shallow, each exhale a fragile thread threatening to snap. Her tears fell into his coat, disappearing into the wet fur as she whispered, "You're not alone anymore. I've got you. I swear I've got you." The rescuer opened the back door, spreading blankets across the seat. Together they lifted him in, the shepherd groaning softly as his body curled into the makeshift bed. His eyes fluttered open again, catching hers for a heartbeat. There was no recognition in them, no trust yet, only exhaustion. But in that look was also something else. A question, maybe, or the tiniest ember of surrender. The rescuer slammed the door shut, urgency tightening his features. "Drive, get him to the clinic. Don't wait." She didn't hesitate. Her hands trembled on the wheel, the engine roaring as she pulled out onto the road, the shepherd behind her, breathing shallowly in the back seat. Each glance in the rearview mirror felt like a countdown. His chest rose, fell, rose again. Sometimes it seemed to pause too long, and she found herself whispering his name. Though she didn't know it yet, she whispered anyway. "Stay with me. Please stay." The highway blurred beneath her tires. Rain streaked the windshield, wipers squeaking in frantic rhythm. Her knuckles whitened against the wheel as she drove faster than she should, praying with every mile that she wasn't too late. In the back seat, the shepherd shifted weakly, his paw twitching against the blanket. His eyes half opened, staring not at the road now, but at the sound of her voice. His body trembled with every breath, but his ears flicked faintly when she spoke, as though he was listening. As though somewhere inside the fog of hunger and heartbreak, he wanted to believe her. The clinic lights glowed faintly in the distance, a beacon through the storm. She pressed the accelerator, her heart hammering louder than the engine. And just as she pulled into the lot, she glanced back and saw his chest stutter. A pause too long, a silence too sharp. Her scream tore through the air. "Don't you leave me now!" The clinic doors burst open with the weight of desperation. The woman stumbled inside, her arms straining as she and the rescuer carried the shepherd's limp body across the slick tile. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, sterile and unforgiving, casting every rib, every hollowed shadow of his form into sharp relief. His fur dripped rainwater onto the floor, leaving a trail of dark stains behind them. "Emergency intake!" the rescuer shouted. His voice echoed against the walls, slicing through the quiet of the late-night clinic. A team of vet techs rushed forward, gurney wheels squealing as they slid it beneath the shepherd's fragile frame. The woman clung to his paw even as they tried to pull him away, her knuckles white, her eyes burning with terror. His paw twitched weakly, his claws catching on her sleeve as though he, too, feared being left again. "Ma'am, we need space," a vet said firmly, though not unkindly. She swallowed, nodded, and stepped back only when the shepherd was secured on the gurney. They wheeled him through swinging doors, the sound of metal instruments clattering faintly in the distance. The woman stood frozen in the lobby, drenched to the bone, her hands trembling. The smell of antiseptic burned her nose, mixing with the wet dog scent that clung to her. Each second dragged into eternity. She pressed her fists against her mouth, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood. "Please, please don't let me have found him too late." Through the glass she glimpsed flashes of motion. The shepherd's body sprawled on the table, oxygen masks strapped over his muzzle, wires and tubes winding across his chest. The steady beeping of a heart monitor punctured the silence like a fragile drumbeat. The vet, a woman with steady hands and grave eyes, turned to her briefly. "He's critical. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, possible infections. His organs are stressed. We'll do everything we can, but he's very weak." The words landed heavy like stones sinking in her chest. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass, her breath fogging it as she watched them work. Hours blurred, time lost meaning under the relentless buzz of the clinic lights. Sometimes the monitor beeped steadily, sometimes it faltered, the gaps between tones stretching too long, making her heart stop in her chest. Each stutter was a cliffhanger, each resumption a fragile miracle. She wasn't allowed inside, but she stayed pressed to that glass, her hands splayed against it, as if somehow her touch could cross the divide. She whispered through the barrier, her voice breaking, "You're not alone anymore. Do you hear me? Don't let go. Don't you dare let go." At one point the vet came out, exhaustion etched into her face. "He's fighting, but we need to be honest. Dogs this far gone. Sometimes they just give up." The woman shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "He hasn't given up. He was waiting. He's been waiting this whole time. Please don't tell me he'll stop now." The vet studied her, something softening in her eyes. She nodded once. "Then we'll fight with him." Inside the shepherd twitched, a faint motion of his tail. It wasn't wagging, not yet, but it moved, just barely, as if stirred by some echo of her voice. The techs exchanged quick glances, their movements slowing in awe. Over the next days, his recovery unfolded like a storm, unpredictable, violent, threaded with fragile calm. One night he spiked a fever so high the vet warned she might need to prepare for the worst. She sat by his side, hand clutching his paw, whispering stories about the life he hadn't lived yet. Fields of grass, warm kitchens, soft beds. "Stay for this," she pleaded, voice breaking. "Stay and you'll see it." The fever broke just before dawn. His breathing steadied, shallow but present. She wept into her hands, shoulders shaking with the weight of reprieve. Another day he refused all food, his eyes glazed, his strength flickering. The vet placed a dish of broth near him, shaking her head. "If he doesn't eat today—" She didn't finish. The woman knelt low, her hand trembling as she held the bowl. She whispered, "Just one taste. For me. Please." Her tears dripped into the broth, salt mixing with warmth. The shepherd's nose twitched. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head, eyes glassy. His tongue flicked once, then again. The broth rippled as he drank, and she let out a sob of relief so deep it felt like her chest cracked open. Every setback was a cliff, every small miracle a rope pulling them back up. Days blurred into nights, her life shrinking to the rhythm of his heartbeat on the monitor, the smell of antiseptic and wet fur, the soft hum of machines. She refused to leave, curling up on a chair by his kennel, her hand always within reach of his paw. Sometimes, when sleep finally dragged her under, she felt the faintest brush of his claws against her skin, not grasping, but reaching. On the fifth night, when the clinic had fallen into hushed silence, he lifted his head on his own. His eyes found hers, still hollow but searching. She held her breath, afraid to break the moment. Then, slowly, his paw slid across the blanket until it rested against her wrist. Her tears fell freely as she whispered, "You're still here." And for the first time she saw it. Not hope for the road, not the desperate search for the car that had abandoned him, but something new, something fragile, fragile as glass, but real. It was the first flicker of trust. And in that moment, beneath the sterile lights and the weight of exhaustion, she knew. They were no longer teetering between life and death. They were standing at the beginning of something else, something worth every sleepless night, every tear shed, every whisper spoken into the void. But recovery was not yet won. The vet warned her, voice low, "He's stable for now, but this is a long road. He could still fall." The woman nodded, her hand never leaving his paw. "Then I'll walk every step with him." And the shepherd, eyes closing at last, pressed his paw tighter against her wrist as if to say, "Don't leave me." The shepherd's cage door creaked open for the first time in weeks. The vet stood back, clipboard in hand, her voice steady but gentle. "He's ready to go. Weak, yes, but strong enough to leave the clinic, if he has someone to care for him." The woman's heart clenched. For nights she had prayed for this moment. For weeks she had fought for it. And now it was here. She was almost afraid to breathe. She knelt before him, her yellow raincoat draped across her lap like a promise. His ribs still showed, his gait was unsteady. But his eyes, those eyes that once held only the hollow stare of abandonment, now flickered with something new. Recognition. A fragile tether had formed between them, invisible but unbreakable. The vet handed her a sheaf of papers. "He'll need medication, gentle food, rest, patience. It won't be easy," the woman smiled through trembling lips. "I never asked for easy." When they stepped into the open air, the shepherd paused at the threshold. The outside world stretched before him, the hiss of cars, the whisper of wind, the smell of rain-soaked grass. He froze, trembling, his body half turning as though to retreat back into the safety of the clinic walls. She lowered herself to his level, her hand steady and warm against his chest. "No one's going to hurt you again," she whispered. "Not while I'm here." The shepherd hesitated, then pressed forward, one paw, then another. The sky, gray with evening, opened like a curtain above them. He walked beside her, not with the easy confidence of trust, but with the tentative courage of one who has decided to try again. The first nights at her home were fragile. He paced endlessly, circling the corners of the room as if searching for the walls of the clinic cage. Every sudden sound made him flinch. Every shadow cast by headlights sent him retreating beneath the table. She never forced him. She simply sat nearby, a quiet presence, her hands folded, her eyes soft. Sometimes she read aloud, not for him to understand the words, but for him to know her voice. Sometimes she hummed softly while cooking broth on the stove, the warm scent filling the house. She left bowls of food in the corner, never pushing them near, only waiting until hunger coaxed him closer. It took 3 nights before he dared to eat with her in the same room. It took 5 before he crept forward to lie near her feet as she sat reading. It took 10 before she woke in the night to find him curled on the rug by her bed, his chest rising and falling with the soft rhythm of sleep. Every tiny milestone broke her heart open wider. One afternoon, weeks later, the world shifted. She led him to a field. Not far, just beyond the edge of town. The air was crisp, golden light spilling across the tall grass. She unclipped his leash, but he didn't move. His ears twitched, his body tense. She knelt down, the leash still resting loosely in her hand. "It's yours," she murmured. "The world is yours again." For a long moment he stayed frozen. Then his nose twitched, catching the scent of earth and clover. His paws shifted, hesitant, then broke into motion. Not a run, not yet, but a slow trot, a testing of freedom. His fur glowed in the late sun, his shadow long and lean against the grass. The woman's breath caught in her chest. When he turned back, his eyes met hers. Not hollow, not searching for what was lost, but anchored, present, alive. And for the first time, his tail wagged. It wasn't much, a slow, uncertain sway. But to her, it was a miracle, a banner of life waving from the ruins of despair. She fell to her knees, laughing through her tears, her hands outstretched. The shepherd trotted back to her, pressing his head into her chest, his body trembling with the force of choosing her, of trusting her. She wrapped her arms around him, her tears wetting his fur, her laughter breaking through sobs. "You're home," she whispered. "You're finally home." Seasons turned, his ribs filled out, his coat grew glossy. Scars remained, both seen and unseen, but they no longer defined him. He learned the rhythm of the house, the creak of the floorboards, the whistle of the kettle, the warmth of the couch where he eventually claimed his spot. He learned the sound of her footsteps, the scent of her clothes, the comfort of her hand brushing through his fur. He learned that not every raised voice meant danger, that not every car meant loss, and she, in turn, learned the language of his silences, when he needed space, when fear clawed back, when memories dragged him into shadows. She learned patience deeper than she had ever known, love fiercer than she had ever carried. Together, they stitched a life from broken pieces. Years later, when strangers asked about the shepherd, they never saw the ghost of the dog he once was. They saw a proud animal with wise eyes, a creature who carried dignity in every step. But she remembered. She remembered the trembling body under the car, the hollow stare in the clinic, the first flicker of trust pressed against her wrist. She remembered the sound of his tail the first time it wagged, the first night he chose to sleep at her side. She remembered because it was not just his story, it was theirs. 2 souls who had been abandoned, who had been told in different ways that they were not enough. 2 souls who had stood at the edge of letting go, and who, by finding each other, had chosen to stay. And so, under the quiet of a golden evening, with the shepherd stretched at her feet, the woman whispered a promise she had made on the night of his rescue. "You'll never be invisible again." And the shepherd, eyes half closed, lifted his head just enough to nuzzle her hand, as if to answer, "I believe you."